Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're diving into another heartbreaking chapter of Tieu Lac and the young CEO's story. The CEO has finally returned to his company and resumed his position as everyone celebrates his comeback. But there's one painful truth no one dares to tell him. Tieu Lac and their daughter have been erased from every conversation. Meanwhile, far away in the quiet village, their little girl waits by the door every single day, asking one heartbreaking question: when is Daddy coming home? Will the CEO's hidden memories finally lead him back to the family he has forgotten, or will their painful separation last forever? Stay until the end to find out. And if you enjoy emotional family dramas filled with powerful twists, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next episode. Morning sunlight slowly spread across the towering glass headquarters of the company. For the first time in months, the young CEO returned. Luxury cars lined the entrance, executives stood in neat rows, employees filled both sides of the lobby, waiting quietly. The revolving doors slowly opened. The CEO stepped inside. He was thinner than before. His movements were slower. The accident had left its mark, but his sharp eyes still carried the confidence everyone remembered. The entire lobby erupted into applause. "Welcome back, Mr. CEO. It's wonderful to see you again. We're so glad you're back." He offered a polite smile. "Thank you. I'm still recovering, but work can't wait forever." The executives exchanged relieved glances. For months, the company had been drifting without its leader. Now, hope had finally returned. Inside the executive conference room, every department head was already waiting. Financial reports covered the massive table: sales figures, investment plans, international expansion. The CEO quietly reviewed each document. His memory of business had returned almost perfectly. He corrected numbers without hesitation, spotted mistakes others had missed, even remembered meetings scheduled months before the accident. One executive whispered to another, "It's unbelievable. It's like he never left." Another nodded. "Except, he smiles much less now." Nobody disagreed. Although their CEO had returned, something about him had changed. He seemed colder, quieter, as if a part of him had never come back. Meanwhile, outside the conference room, his mother stood speaking with the senior management team. Her voice remained calm, but every word carried unmistakable authority. "There is one rule." Everyone listened carefully. "No one, under any circumstance, will mention the name Tieu Lac." Silence filled the hallway. One executive hesitated. "But Chairman, what if Mr. CEO asks?" She looked directly into his eyes. "Then your answer is simple. There is no one by that name." Another manager lowered his voice. "And the child?" Her expression immediately hardened. "Neither. That chapter of his life is over. I don't want anyone reopening wounds that haven't healed." No one dared argue. They simply nodded. Every person understood. Disobeying her meant losing everything. The morning meeting finally ended. Employees returned to their offices. The CEO remained alone inside the conference room. He slowly walked toward the panoramic window overlooking the city. Thousands of cars moved below. Life continued as usual, yet something felt strangely unfamiliar. He placed one hand against the glass. Why did success suddenly feel so empty? His office was exactly as he remembered. The city skyline hadn't changed. His company was still standing. He had regained everything. So why did it feel like he had lost the most important thing of all? His assistant entered quietly. "Sir, your afternoon schedule is ready." The CEO nodded, then suddenly asked, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Before the accident, was I—" He searched for the right words. "Happy?" The assistant froze. He immediately remembered the chairman's warning. No one must mention Tieu Lac. No one. He forced a professional smile. You were devoted to your work. You always put the company first. The CEO frowned slightly. Only work? Yes, sir. There wasn't anything else. The assistant swallowed. No. The answer came too quickly, too perfectly. The CEO quietly nodded. Yet, for some reason, he didn't believe it. Far away, in the peaceful mountain village, life moved much more slowly. Morning mist still floated above the strawberry fields. Birds sang from the old trees. Children laughed along the narrow dirt paths. But inside one small wooden house, the atmosphere was very different. Tieu Lac carefully prepared breakfast, a simple bowl of porridge, fresh vegetables, warm tea. Her little daughter climbed onto the wooden chair, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Mom," Tieu Lac smiled gently. "Good morning." The little girl looked toward the front door. Just like every morning, she asked the same question. "When is Daddy coming home?" The smile on Tieu Lac's face froze, only for a second. Then she knelt beside her daughter. "Soon. Daddy promised." The little girl smiled brightly. "I know. Daddy never breaks his promises." Those innocent words pierced Tieu Lac's heart. She quickly turned away, pretending to arrange the dishes so her daughter wouldn't see the tears filling her eyes. At the other end of the room, Tieu Lac's elderly mother quietly witnessed everything. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she folded the laundry. She had watched this scene every single morning, every single day. The same question, the same answer, the same silent tears. When the little girl finished breakfast and ran outside to play, the old woman slowly walked toward her daughter. "You can't keep hiding your pain forever." Tieu Lac forced a smile. "I'm fine." Her mother gently held her hand. "No, you're not. You hardly sleep. You barely eat. And every night, I hear you crying." Tieu Lac lowered her head. For weeks, she had hidden everything from everyone. But she couldn't hide it from the woman who had raised her. "I miss him," she whispered. "So much." Her voice finally broke. "I don't even know if he still remembers us." Her mother slowly pulled her into an embrace, just like when Tieu Lac was a little girl. "You've carried this burden alone long enough." Tieu Lac couldn't hold back anymore. She buried her face against her mother's shoulder. Tears streamed down uncontrollably. "I don't care about money. I don't care about his company. I only wanted our family." Outside, the little girl picked a tiny wildflower. She ran back toward the house with the brightest smile. "Grandma." "Mom, look, I found a flower for Daddy." Both women instantly fell silent. The little girl proudly held up the tiny yellow blossom. "When Daddy comes home, I'm going to give him this. I've been saving the prettiest flowers." Tieu Lac quickly covered her mouth. She couldn't stop herself from crying. Her elderly mother looked at the child, then at her daughter, and quietly turned away, because she knew nothing hurt more than watching a child wait faithfully for a father who never came home. The little girl carefully placed the tiny yellow flower into an old glass jar on the windowsill. She stepped back with a proud smile. "There. So Daddy can see it when he comes home." Tieu Lac quietly turned toward the window. The mountain breeze gently moved the thin curtain. Outside, everything looked peaceful. Inside, her heart felt heavier than ever. That same afternoon, the CEO officially resumed his duties. For the first time since the accident, he chaired the executive board meeting. Every senior executive sat silently around the long conference table. Large screens displayed quarterly reports, investment strategies, expansion projects. The company had survived, but everyone knew it had done so without its true leader. The CEO calmly reviewed every presentation. His sharp business instincts had returned. He corrected forecasts, questioned risky investments, suggested solutions no one else had considered. By the end of the meeting, the board members applauded. One elderly director smiled. "Welcome home, Mr. CEO. The company finally feels complete again." The CEO thanked everyone politely. Yet, he couldn't shake the strange emptiness inside him. As the executives slowly left the room, he noticed something unusual. A framed family photograph stood on a bookshelf near the conference entrance. It showed one of the department managers smiling beside his wife and young son. Without realizing it, the CEO stopped walking. He stared at the picture. A warm feeling suddenly rose inside his chest. For just one brief second, he almost saw another little child smiling back at him, a tiny hand reaching toward him. Then, the image vanished. His head immediately throbbed. He closed his eyes. "What is happening to me?" His assistant hurried over. "Sir, are you all right?" The CEO slowly nodded. "It's nothing. Just another headache." But deep inside, he knew it wasn't nothing. Every time he saw a happy family, his heart reacted before his mind could understand why. That evening, his mother entered his office carrying several documents. "You've worked enough for today. You still need rest." The CEO leaned back in his chair. "I've almost caught up." She smiled gently. "Everyone is impressed. You've recovered faster than anyone expected." He remained quiet. After several moments, he suddenly asked, "Mother." She looked at him. "Have I ever wanted children?" The question caught her completely off guard. She forced herself not to react. "What makes you ask that?" He looked toward the city lights outside. "I don't know, but every time I see a child, my heart feels lonely." She slowly walked to the window beside him. "You've been through a terrible accident. Your emotions are still unstable. You'll feel normal again soon." The CEO nodded, but something inside him whispered, that wasn't the answer. Back in the village, night slowly covered the mountains. The little wooden house glowed with warm candlelight. Dinner was simple: rice, vegetables, a bowl of soup. The little girl happily chatted while eating. Then suddenly, she looked toward the empty chair. "Mom." Tieu Lac looked up. "When Daddy comes home, can we all eat together again?" The chopstick slipped from Tieu Lac's hand. A sharp sound echoed across the quiet room. She quickly bent down to pick them up, hiding the tears filling her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "One day." The little girl smiled with complete confidence. "I knew it," Daddy promised. "He'll find his way home." Across the table, Tieu Lac's elderly mother quietly lowered her head. She couldn't bear to watch any longer. Every hopeful word from the child felt like another wound in her daughter's heart. Later that night, after putting her daughter to bed, Tieu Lac stepped outside alone. The stars stretched endlessly across the mountain sky. She slowly opened the small wooden box she always carried. Inside were the memories she treasured most: a faded photograph, a handwritten promise, a tiny baby shoe, and one old business card with the CEO's name printed across it. She gently traced his name with trembling fingers. "I heard you're back at work." A faint smile appeared through her tears. "You've always loved protecting everyone. I'm glad you can stand again." She looked toward the distant city beyond the mountains. "So even if you never remember us, I'll still pray that you're happy." The wind carried away her whisper into the silent night. The next morning, the CEO arrived at headquarters earlier than usual, before anyone else. He wanted a few quiet moments alone. As he walked through the nearly empty lobby, his eyes suddenly stopped on something unexpected. Near the reception desk, a little girl was waiting with her father. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. She laughed as her father lifted her into his arms. "Daddy!" The CEO froze. His breathing slowed. Something deep inside him suddenly trembled. Without realizing it, he whispered, "Little one." The little girl smiled brightly before running away, holding her father's hand. The CEO remained standing there, watching them disappear. A strange warmth spread through his chest, followed almost instantly by unbearable sadness. He had no idea why. High above, from the second-floor balcony, his mother had witnessed everything. She quietly closed her eyes. The doctors had been right. His memories hadn't disappeared. They were still alive, hidden deep inside his heart, waiting for the smallest spark to bring them back. And somewhere far away, in the peaceful mountain village, a little girl placed another fresh flower into the growing jar beside the window. "There," she smiled, "so Daddy will have lots of flowers when he finally comes home." Neither she nor Tieu Lac knew that destiny had already begun pulling their family back together, because somewhere inside the company, one forgotten memory was about to change everything. After recovering from his accident, the young CEO finally returns to the company and resumes his powerful position. Everyone celebrates his comeback, but behind the smiles lies a painful secret. No one is allowed to mention Tieu Lac or their daughter. Although his business memories have returned, the CEO feels strangely empty and begins questioning why images of happy families trigger emotions he cannot explain. Meanwhile, far away in the mountain village, Tieu Lac continues raising their little girl with the help of her elderly mother. Every day, the child waits hopefully for her father, saving flowers for the day he comes home and repeatedly asking when Daddy will return. Tieu Lac hides her heartbreak behind a smile, while her mother watches helplessly as both mother and daughter suffer. But deep inside the CEO, forgotten memories are slowly beginning to awaken.